Hello and welcome to this evening's webinar, An Interdependent Future, Why Collaboration is Key. This is our third webinar in a series of ISM Trust and Delic sessions where panelists of industry experts discuss current issues for musicians and explore how we might find a solution to overcome these challenges, focusing on tools, skills and strategies to help music creators succeed. The ISM Trust is the Incorporated Society of Musicians' sister charity and works to ensure that all music professionals in the UK can reach their full potential by creating pioneering resources. You can find out more about the ISM Trust and Delic by following the links in the chat box. Before I hand over to John and our panelists for today, I have just a few technical points for you. If you experience any technical difficulties, such as sound quality issues, please let us know in the chat box and we'll make attempts to resolve the issues. The subtitles are available if you wish to enable them or disable them by selecting the live caption option at the bottom of the screens. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM Trust's website at ismtrust.org/webinars, as well as on our YouTube channel and Delic's website. If you have any questions, please let us know in the questions box and we'll endeavour to answer as many of them as possible at the end. You can also join the conversation online by using the hashtag ISMxDelic. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to John and our panelists, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Good evening, and welcome to the ISM and Delic sessions. I'm John Maxwell Hobbs. I'm the CEO of Delic, a platform for the creation of music to support from the creation of music from idea to release. Now, today we're talking about collaboration. And while technology has arguably made it easier than ever to release music independently, many of the tools needed are still designed to take advantage of their users. From social media to streaming platforms, music's power structures are shifting, with artists often finding themselves falling through the cracks. This leads to questions when using this technology about who profits from an artist's music and how can the rights of the creator be safeguarded. One solution may lie in networks of independent cooperatives, whereby labels, studios, publications, etc., can work together to retain collective ownership of music and create a fairer system for their artists. This talk will introduce pioneering new tools to help artists collaborate, and will examine the role that the traditional world of labels and distributors might play in an interdependent future. Now, joining on this panel is Vick Bain, Matt Dryhurst, and Ed Stack. Vick Bain has worked in the music industry for 25 years and is a consultant and campaigner for diversity and inclusion in the music industry, training and advising organizations from every sector and genre of music. This is grounded in her work as a PhD researcher at Queen Mary University in the Center for Research in Equality and Diversity, researching women's careers in music. Vick is a regular press commentator on gender diversity in the music industry with regular articles, as well as the influential report Counting the Music Industry, a gender audit of UK record labels and publishing companies. She's also the founder of the F-List Directory of Female Musicians, which is a not-for-profit organization supporting female musicians. She's the president-elect of the ISM, representing nearly 11,000 musicians in the UK, as well as being a trustee of charity Parents and Carers in Performing Arts, and a board director of Delic. Vick was enrolled into the Music Week Women in Music Awards Roll of Honor and Radio 4 Women's Hour Music Industry Power List. Now moving to Matt Dryhurst. Matt is an artist, musician, theorist, and vociferous advocate for decentralization as an ideological necessity for independent musicians. He developed the Saga publishing framework to allow artists to take control of every discrete instance of their work online and work solo and in collaboration with his partner, Holly Herndon. He has worked with independent record labels, including Pan and Southern Records, and nonprofit agencies such as San Francisco's Gray Area. He is also involved with Resonate, a blockchain-based streaming platform founded in Berlin. He is also a lecturer at Tisch School of the Arts in New York. And Matt and Holly recently launched their podcast, Interdependence, Conversation with Figures Shaping 21st Century Culture. And Ed Stack, who is from Delic, is creative producer, data visualization designer, and social entrepreneur. Ed founded the DIY download portal 10 Tracks in 2007, and in 2010 was the music director of what is now Scotland's largest DIY festival, Hidden Door. Ed has since founded Profit to Artists Social Enterprise Decagram and formed delic.network in 2013, which is one of Informatic Ventures' top 60 emerging technology companies in 2017, and was just named as one of Createch's 100 ones to watch in 2021. Now, we'll open this by giving you each 5 minutes. We'll start with Vick Bain. We're going alphabetically. And in 5 minutes, I'd like to get your definition of collaboration and what you are doing to support it.
I don't know if I have an exact definition, but really I feel like the music industry is based on collaboration anyway. It's all about personal networks. The whole industry is a networked industry. Something like 92% of everyone who works in music works for a company that is employs less than 10 people, so micro businesses who are all connected together, and extraordinary levels of freelancers. So whereas in the rest of the UK, in all of the sectors, 16% of those working will be self-employed freelancers. In the music industry, well, for musicians, it's 82%. So it's an extraordinary high level of individuals. And the only way these individuals can get on and survive is to collaborate and network with each other. The problems arise where certain people have privileges in that network and over others. And those are people from middle class and privileged backgrounds, and men and white people as well, have a lot more social capital to allow them to benefit from these networks. So there was fantastic research published today by Dr. Dave O'Brien and Dr. Olivia Cable, and it's all about inequality and class privilege in the creative industries. So I would recommend people have a look out for that. So as to what I'm doing about this, I think all of the organizations I've worked for over the past 16 years have all been focused on collectives and collectors. So I've been involved with music trade bodies. I was 13 years with the British Academy of Songwriters, Composers and Authors, and now for the past few years with the ISM. And I really believe that collective, is the way forward. Collaboration is the way forward. And part of my interest with Delic was certainly about that as well, opening up the music industry to knock down these barriers. So I don't know if I gave a pure definition of collaboration, but I think I've sort of outlined some of the issues and where I'm coming from in our sort of in independent networked industry that we all work in.
All right, great. Thank you, Vic. And we'll hand over to Matt now. Same question. What is collaboration and what are you doing to support it?
It's a great question. Yeah, borrowing a little from Vic's framing, my own, so I've been involved in independent music since I was about 17 years old, in various capacities, performing, working at labels, doing other stuff now. And we've always been sold this idea of independence, right? Independent music was separate from it. It was probably like a really important distinction to make back in a time of kind of these large central record companies that had very specific agendas, privilege very specific people, as Vic was right to point out. It was an important distinction, really nice idea to be independent of this kind of main structure. However, in retrospect, when I look back, for at least my experience, and I'm sure everyone here has the same kind of experience, is that independence in a sense was a bit of a fallacy, right? Like the independent artist, the idea of an independent artist was a bit of a fallacy, right? Like ultimately the reason why in, let's say, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, we had these kind of icons that represented an alternate path media, was because there was kind of a pyramid of characters underneath them that enabled for that to happen, right? And so the conclusion I came to was that ultimately, independence itself was a great idea in, say, the 60s and 70s. But in retrospect, most of the things that we actually like and retain some romance around with independent music were the interdependent parts, right? And that stuff becomes really, really clear when we see that idea of independence has moved from like a countercultural context in the late 20th century to being kind of the name of the game in the economy we live in right now, right? Everyone has access to tools that give them as special individuals the ability to hypothetically make a career for themselves. But what they don't have is they don't have people looking out for them. They don't have labels funding them. They don't have all of these things that I associate with the independent record industry of the late 20th century, people don't really have access to. And so also agreeing with Vic, the only kind of bright future from this, outside of like the dog eat dog kind of feed wars of kind of like a couple of individuals dominating, or a couple of individual companies for that matter, dominating the music landscape, is to focus on the truth of things, which is the interdependence of things, that you can't actually cost cut away. You can't cost cut as we have done in the past decade or so, and expect to see the same kind of like verdant, beautiful results come from music cultures as we've grown to expect with the independent music industry. So in my own capacity, I've been working particularly, what I'll end up talking about a lot, I'd imagine, particularly working on kind of decentralized systems for music infrastructure since about 2014, 2015. That has grown significantly over the past few years. And I think it also comes to symbolize in many ways this transition from independence to interdependence, actually, because these kind of distributed ledger networks, decentralized networks, only really work when everyone's kind of pulling together. That's kind of part of the point. And as hopefully I'll clarify over the course of this session, some of the cool and kind of fundamental ideas of what is coming to be characterized as Web3 are fundamentally interdependent, right? My prediction, in a sense, and it's not mine alone, is within the next 5 to 10 years, most musicians or cultural workers, period, will only be happy to contribute to platforms, publications, labels that they own a stake in. And that's kind of one of the big ideas behind the stuff I've been working on for the past 6 years. And I think it's going to ultimately provide a big challenge to the independence narrative that we've all gotten used to and some of us live under the bane of.
Sorry, I was muted. Great, thank you very much, Matt. And now we'll hand over to Ed. Once again, same question.
Hi, everyone. So what does collaboration mean? Basically, collaboration is relationship. So relationship between two people, minimum. You can kind of collaborate with yourself, but that's usually called solo work. So yeah, two people minimum, and then scale up from there. I would say I'm really interested in the essence of that relationship. So it's about creating quality in those relationships, and that you have a one-to-one relationship with everyone, even if there's 4 of us on the call, there's only one relationship between myself and Matt, for example. So music has, from a very, very young age, attracted me as the medium in which that relationship takes place in its purest form. Because, for example, you're not necessarily needing to misunderstand each other's words. As one example, you can use an instrument to relate based on a feeling or an internal sort of impulses and receptivity. So amazing research on this done as a collaboration between Durham and Edinburgh, I believe, on jazz, and the fact that talk about synchronicity in music, and of a slightly inexperienced audience watching a rock band and watching experimental jazz band with the sound on, the experimental jazz band is judged to be less synchronous than the rock band. As soon as you turn the sound off and do the same thing, the experimental jazz band is deemed to be roughly as synchronous, or a lot more synchronous than it was judged in the previous example. This is because the people are relating, regardless of what sound comes out. So there's an element of this is diversity. So diversity to express yourself however you want to express yourself. And those experimental communities end up being the kind of communities in which people have seen a certain scene, a certain way of doing things, and they've defined their artistic career through that recognition of what they value in terms of relationship. So there's that sort of desire to almost be quite protective of that for society, and the fact that there isn't much that protects those niches, even though the life journeys they've taken are perhaps some of the most important for humanity at large. So the bigger models that maybe Matt was referring to are affecting that community, and COVID-19 has essentially decimated the incomes of that community. So this is something I've been working on for about 15 years. And even then, working on the business side, you see all the tensions based on the fact that there's a power dynamic, like inevitably. And that's why it's very exciting to have this, whilst it's hugely challenging for all the reasons Matt has mentioned, it's very exciting to have the ability online for there to be choices and to be tools where you can decide to self-define and find those relationships. I say there are tools. I'm biased towards Delic, obviously, which I can describe, but there aren't that many tools. But there are a lot of tools emerging in this space and equitable business models. So in terms of myself, I don't have too long, but it's the 10 tracks thing John mentioned was 10 songs for £1 at a time when Spotify didn't even exist. Lots of people were illegal downloading. So I started a business where we tried to sell 10 songs for £1 with compilations with quite big artists on them, supporting tiny artists from the same city, that kind of thing. And that was obviously, people were making per download like 40 times more than they'd make, or 400 times or something more than they'd make from a Spotify stream, but they've only earned like 4p a track. Great. So even I, as someone who believes in this, had to squash the price as much as I could in order for it to people to buy. So there are economic issues there. Anyway, fairness is a huge element of that relationship. And the thing that people seek in those creative relationships is kind of echoed in the business relationships and the choices they make. And then you've got Decagram, which is profit to artists. So it's selling beer and giving the profits from the beer to the artists. That's a fairness related thing. And then most recently Delic, which to be in a nutshell, helps people track their contributions to projects so that they don't have to worry about those conversations that actually do interrupt the creative flow and are not the main point until some time later, when 1 out of 100 of the songs you've done in your career happens to take off and you don't own the rights to it because you didn't mind in the moment. It was a great musical moment. So what we want to do with Delic is just remove the concern. It's handled. We've got it. We got you. And then in the future, we probably get into this stuff, but NFTs and different technologies can now protect your rights and see recurring revenue come back to you in a much more reliable way than it could come back through the vinyl industry or CD sales. So anyway, that kind of brings us to the present. But I think the last word on collaboration is transparency, and being honest to each other and trying to embed that not just in personal relationships, group relationships, but in business governance and structure and the way that people treat each other in the macro level as well.
Great, thanks, Ed. And now we're going to open it up to all the panelists. But I'll hand to Matt first with this question, because I know you've spoken very eloquently on this issue. Do you still need an agent, a label, or distributor, or can you go it alone? And if so, where would you start?
Oh, it's a great question. You absolutely can go it alone. And I feel like in some ways, as much as I'm critical of kind of Web 2, it ought to be acknowledged that there are a lot of tools available for you to do that. The challenge is how far will you go alone, right? In a way, the way I've characterized something like a Spotify or streaming services is, they work really, really well for the top. It's something crazy. It's like the 0.2%. And happen to work quite well for, the bottom 80 to 90% of people who want to be in that top 0.1%, right? And so going it alone, having those tools available to you to make a career, undeniably you have more access and ability to do that now, but I'm not too sure on the success rate. So I think that in terms of labels, agencies, yes, they help. I mean, I think that labels in many cases, and music infrastructure generally, it differs from scene to scene, but I know in scenes that I'm part of, always have kind of like, there's a degree of skepticism around the idea, right? We still in some ways kind of harbor this this hangover from, I guess, like 90s download culture or something like that, the big bad labels who want to hold the artist down and control everything. And it's like, yeah, some about I find personally that whether it be a label or just a group of people, the collectives that Vic mentioned, who are kind of looking out for each other, that to me is generally generally when you see something surprise you in terms of it going further than you might have expected, that's usually the story behind it. Whether it's people who have each other's back and can coordinate over a period of time. Because the other side to this too is that in choosing to go alone, you're also incurring a lot of things there, right? There's some people in the world I'm thinking about plotting, for things, but
sorry, Matt, we're having some
part of
difficulty with your connection, Matt.
Excuse me. Let me see. Am I back now?
We lost the last part of your answer.
Oh damn. Yeah. So you can go alone, and there's
Still, well, we'll see if Matt comes back. Very dynamic frozen image. Until he does, I'm going to hand over to you, Vic, particularly thinking about your perspective, having worked with Baska. So from the songwriter perspective, it's slightly different and maybe even a bit more difficult. So what's your view on this?
Well, I think with songwriters and composers, getting a publishing deal is pretty much all they think about. But there were lots of people who were going DIY and establishing pretty good careers. However, I do also want to say who are the people who are getting those deals? Who is the music industry? Big corporations. Who are they investing in? And my analysis and counting the music industry two years ago revealed that only 14% of those signed to current publishing rosters and 20% of artists and musicians signed to labels were female. So for female musicians, actually, this might not be your choice to go it alone, to be independent. It's what you have to do. So I know on a previous panel, you had the amazing artist Vishy, who has a fantastic career and has done some wonderful things in her career. She became an independent musician because she couldn't find any interest from the major labels who really wanted to put her in a box and couldn't figure out, quite what box she fitted in. So she created her own. So I think for musicians, it's really important that they get as much support otherwise in helping them with their careers. They need lots of business advice. They need to know how the industry works, how the royalties flow. They need to know all about their contracts and their legal situation, and how best to earn money in what is a cutthroat competitive business. So all of the organizations I've really worked for the past 16 years have been organizations that in some way or in many ways help musicians with all of that information, to give them the tools in order that they can make some money and get an income stream and survive. So yeah, it's hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Ed, from your perspective as both a musician and a producer in the Scottish DIY scene, looking at it from that side of things, what's your view? You're on mute.
Definitely interdependence, not independence. Going it alone. I mean, based on what I was saying before, you kind of should always be alone in a certain sense, as in making your own sort of decisions, seeing the world clearly and trying to do the best thing, in that situation. But that leads you to the relationships that I was referring to. And that's how I feel like the DIY scene has always worked, because it kind of attracts those natural relationships. One of the things that was huge at the time that I was most active in that sort of scene community, the kind of community that questions the terms, is it a scene really? What does that mean? But a key component of that was the live context, which we've completely lost during COVID. So what you'd do is you'd encounter people doing interesting things, whether they're in the audience, loving music beside you, loving the same music, or whether they're a musician you want to chat to afterwards, or if you're in a band, or a support band. There's so many ways in which you can meet people. There's a random mixing element provided by the bar. There's just so much good sort of, if you kind of analyze it from a business perspective, you find so many amazing stats in terms of interpersonal relationships. If you look at the bar, if you look at the venue, you also see, I would imagine, well, I mean, I know some stats, but not as much as Vic, where these things operate against certain minorities as well. Huge work needs to be done, but just simply the presence of the outside world, as opposed to just your screen, your apps, that sort of thing, is hugely important. So I think that's really important, and people talk about it in terms of their creative practice as well. You can't make music that well. You can make music solo, but group music making processes for the people who do that on Delic, our research shows that that's hugely important. It's not going to change. So is live performance. We want to, as a tool, we want to recognize that and help that. We don't want to sort of replace it as a remote working thing where we all become brains in a jar. So that's, yeah. So in terms of the question, circling back, you move alone and you attract community, I think. And the challenge, I think, right now is monetizing that attraction whilst retaining the independence of view that leads to the interdependence that you have chosen, which I think is really well encapsulated with what Vic said about Bishy and the ability to be thoughtful about your career and to look at the positives and see if there's funding, these kind of things. Start seeing, how do you extend your brand, that you don't want to be a brand, but you know what I mean? Bishy's got lots of technological elements to the work that she does, and seeing what music is and sort of to its fullness is a good thing to do in terms of expanding your imagination to the world of making money as well, as opposed to saying, oh, that's someone else's deal. Actually, there's a huge opportunity in saying that's not someone else's deal, that's my deal, and I'm going to do it creatively.
All right, and that actually moves us into a question, and particularly to consider sort of people who are not typically hanging out at the bar, let's say classical musicians or people who are new to the profession. Not saying that classical musicians don't hang out at the bar, but it's a different sort of ethos. But
different drinks.
Yes. How do you network? And it's sort of, let's consider networking in the COVID era, and then also in the hopefully post-COVID era as well. And I'm just throwing this out to the floor. So whoever jumps on this question first gets to answer first.
Can I just clarify? Is it about how are we going to do it in the post-COVID era, or is it right now?
Can be in the COVID era or the post-COVID era, but for people who are new to the profession, how do you start networking? Looks like Matt, who did get cut off earlier, so I'll hand it over to him.
Yeah, hopefully, sorry, I live in Berlin and we have like internet from the 1980s here. So, yeah, no, I mean, it's one of those things that's quite difficult to look past, but generally speaking, at least in the corners of music I'm familiar with, you network through participating. That the real challenge with that is that you are saying to people quite clearly that, there are certain hubs of activity that over time prove to be better places to network than others. And that's just a reality. Oftentimes, a lot of those are physical locations like a London or an Edinburgh or Glasgow or wherever it might be, Manchester, Liverpool. But in my experience, there's so few examples actually where you've seen something succeed and thrive in its context. This is not necessarily saying succeed in terms of someone becoming a megastar, but something becoming established where I wouldn't be able to identify a story of those people being connected through a social group or a professional group. Yeah, that just is is kind of the name of the game. And so I think that the way in which I've always done it, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a cynical thing or a targeted thing. The way I've always done it is through participation, and I think at least with students, I think I have a lot of students who are, younger, 18, 19, 20, and can do everything online. And of course, there is this capacity now to be able to network online. But one thing I try and establish is that even amongst people who are 18, 19, 20, 21, generally speaking, when I see something thrive, I can kind of identify a scene in a New York or a London or a Manchester or a Liverpool or a Glasgow that has kind of enabled that. It's generally the rule. And so, yeah, so fundamentally it's like participate, like play shows, don't worry about creating the perfect record before someone doesn't know, before people don't know who you are. Ultimately, the people in the groups that are around you are what's going to help you get to another level, and that's just a truth that it's undeniable to me. That is kind of the major distinction between people who end up having kind of longer careers and people who don't.
Okay, thanks. Vic, I'd like to hand this over to you, particularly in terms of the work that you've done around the F list, because it really feels like you're trying to find a way to create a network for women who have been largely excluded from the traditional networks.
Yes, that's right, and really embracing technology. I mean, I guess this is something that sort of came out of the enforced isolation last year, and in March. I was halfway through a big tour all around UK of various universities and women in music groups presenting my research, and it all got cancelled in a couple of days. And I sat at home and just thought, my gosh, what am I gonna do now? And it sort of just came to my mind that I should put a lot of the data that I had collected through my research online. And that data was at the time a list of about 3,500 female musicians and bands who were lucky enough to have women playing in them, and the labels of the publishing companies that they were signed to. So I published that online in a Google spreadsheet, just sort of free for anybody to access, and people could contact me and be added to it. And that was a way of sort of saying to the industry, look, there are thousands of women out here, who are really great musicians. These are the ones that are signed. I then started gathering, hundreds of names of women who weren't yet signed or who were self-releasing, just to sort of say, make these women visible. Here is where they are, and here's where you can find them. And that sort of developed last year. It sort of took on momentum, and it really snowballed. And now it's a not-for-profit organization. It's got its own proper website. It's a searchable directory. So anyone who wants to find a female musician with any skill set, playing any instrument in any music genre in every part of the UK, can go onto that website and find someone. Could be another musician wanting to find another musician to collaborate with. It could be, someone who wants to book a band for their festival. It could be for fans wanting to discover new music by women in the genres that they like. So that really has kept me very busy over the past year, and it's been fantastic. So we've got 5,200 listings now, and it's every single day it's growing. And in fact, on Monday the 27th, we're going to have our first networking event. I'm just about to send an email out to our ambassadors at the Private Music College, ICMP, doing a joint event with the F List. So it's a female producers networking event in person. So this is the first in-person music industry event I would have been to in a year and a half, and I can't wait. I'm really excited. So I think it's about having a combination of these online tools, which are so amazing. I know that we've created this really special community of female musicians online, but that we can have now and again. We now have the privilege, hopefully, to start getting back and meeting people who I've been working with for a year and a half for the first time in person. So I'm very excited about that.
That's a really interesting point that everybody's made, which is the thing about in person and scenes. I think that should probably be a subject of another Delic session, because there's Delic and ISM session, because there's a lot to unpick there. I want to remind everybody watching and listening in the audience, we're about to open up to your questions. So use the Q&A box. Don't use the chat box. Use the Q&A box and start sending questions in. So here's a bit of a cheeky question, and we'll see who can answer it. The global music industry is already extremely decentralized, even in spite of the roll-up of indie labels into the majors and things like that. Just ask anybody who's trying to get their rights registered with one of the global performing societies, or a musician in the United States who wants to get paid for neighboring rights. So that decentralization, isn't that part of the problem? And how does interdependence solve that?
think I'll let you do that.
Quick answer. Go
Matt,
ahead.
you start. Don't know.
No. It's a fair point. I mean, decentralization is the reality, right? Like, and I don't have any issues with central organizations who are attempting to, for example, get musicians paid, even though the point being, when I refer to decentralization, it's more to do with like decentralization of mandate, decentralization of design, decentralization of economic proposals, right? Like, one of the things I like to rail on, for example, as the classic example of centralization, is this idea that, you know, a lot of people will complain about streaming rates, right? But I think if you dig a little bit deeper, the bigger problem with that, outside of the streaming rate itself, is the central mandate that, you know, ultimately at some point people made the decision that the best way to value music was to value it on a per play basis, right? Which is absurd for a lot of music. I mean, Ed, you were discussing jazz earlier. Like, heaven forbid, you know, looking at the streaming numbers of like some of the most kind of celebrated and feted jazz musicians of all time are probably quite poor, right? Because choosing to attach a number or attach value to the amount of time something is played is not necessarily perfect or ideal for all musicians. And so that's a concept that could be decentralized, and I think will end up serving more people. And so over time, you know, decentralization is the reality. We have different scenes in different contexts, different people who expect different outcomes from their music, that they aren't making music to be played millions of times. That's not the goal of their music, right? And so decentralizing the mandate, decentralizing who's making the decisions as to how they get to make money and how they get to find other people, as is happening with an increasingly smaller group of companies, that's kind of the idea. And so to speak to your point, John, like, yeah, like decentralization is the reality, and I've got nothing against central organizations who are attempting to protect artist rights, kind of carte blanche. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But it's more to do with the reality that, you know, we all exist in and we participate in, you know, many different economic relationships, many different kind of non-economic relationships, and for all of those to be determined by, you know, a few people in Stockholm seems a bit absurd. Yeah, that's maybe the entry point and the realization, or the good news is that there is a new internet that is very real at this point in time, and that's another one of the founding principles of it, right? Is that there is no central mandate, that ultimately you will be able to draw up economic arrangements with groups of people you know and groups of people you don't know, and hopefully, as is my goal, there will be 20,000 different proposals for how musicians can make a living, and not 3 that we, you know, debate ad nauseum. So that's part of the idea, is that ultimately I want the tech that we work with, and the interactions we have with each other to be as diverse and decentralized as they actually are in the real world, and not be kind of awkwardly trying to squeeze one global agenda for music economies, which when you frame it like that just seems patently absurd. Yeah.
All right. And I saw it got you hopping in your seat.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think it's a kind of not a very glamorous word, but it's kind of like the digital realm is not the physical realm. You need to be able to map onto the digital realm some accuracy, some accurate representation of the physical realm that is in some sense usefully translated for the uses that digital has, the positive uses digital has. And one of the key aspects of doing that is to be able to represent yourself online, essentially, and to be able to navigate with the same freedom of movement you have in a free country. And then work on the policies that enable that and that maximize the chances of that. Now, obviously with Delic being, you know, just a company in the world alongside a bunch of other companies, you know, there's a kind of mental model that people are going to have about that. And I think I'm very conscious of that, you know, within what we do. I'm fascinated by, for example, the usability versus ideological purity I've just said as if it's some known thing, but you know, I'm interested in how, for example, Coinbase, a cryptocurrency exchange, is a centralized exchange for the purposes of being able to use it easily. It's easy to use, therefore it's decentralized in spirit in a certain way. So design is actually, is if you trust a brand that they have your interests at heart, like Matt was saying, if you represent a body of musicians, say like ISM, for example, you represent a body of musicians, and you have governance that enables the genuine message to come from your members, customers, or whatever it is, and you act on it, then you may be more decentralized in an essential way than a really ideologically driven, but not very technologically equipped blockchain operation. You know, it's so there's a liberation in that, but there's also the need to realize that you still also have to have a certain level of technology that is enshrining that freedom. And I think we're living through the age in which the consequences of big tech and turning the customer into the product, that's what we're moving away from. And it's very exciting, I think.
All right, great. Thanks all of you for that. Now we're moving into questions from the audience. First one we've got from Belinda Borstein. Sorry. What does interdependence mean in practical terms? What is an independent artist? Interdependent artist, sorry. Who would like to take that?
I wouldn't mind having a stab on the,
All right, Ed.
because you got the networking question from earlier, and I think there is something about the networking through participation, which is quite a good way of looking at that. The example that came to mind when Matt and Vic were talking about it was this idea, this kind of norm, or at least maybe it's a slightly outdated norm, I'm not sure. We're doing a little bit of research with some resident musicians at the moment, who I just want to plug, get paid by the government from COVID funding to make music 25 hours a week. And I'm really proud of that at Delic, that we're doing that, allowing 2 musicians to basically make music all the time. But at the moment, I'm working with them to find the labels that they like and think about how they might present the EP that they're working on together, how they might, what labels they like, who are local, thinking strategically about, should it be the whole of the UK I'm looking at, just local, global, oh, I just want to go straight to a Def Jam, it's that sort of thing. And even those labels, the A&R people in the labels are going to be looking for you to have that sort of, there's something about music that comes out of those communities of people who are participating. So there's definitely like completely, niche sort of someone who lives in an attic and has like 100 modular synths, that sort of thing. But again, that's still something that's embraced by a community. Someone needs to be able to recognize the value of that guy in the attic. And it's not going to be people who, I don't know, it has to be from the music community, even, and it's the sort of acceptance of difference and of diversity in certain types of community. I guess I'm talking about the experimental one quite a lot, and maybe idealizing a lot of what I'm saying. But I think being interdependent is about being able to move between different scenes, venues, and looking at the world as an opportunity to connect and identify where connections are trusted and where people have your best interests at heart. There's nothing very practical about what I said there, though. So apologies.
No, it's useful. Thank you. Have another question here. I'm going to direct this at Vic, because although not specifically related to the F list, it is about figuring out ways to get to the next level. This is from Annalena Vater. It says, especially as a young new band, how would you reach out to people getting you to the next level, and who? First producers and labels, other bands or venues, and hope people will be there?
Yeah, I guess that's part of it. I mean, I would always recommend joining an organization like the ISM, or if you are a producer or an engineer join the MPG or something that is relevant to your skill set, and take advantage of everything that they offer, because they will help with networking and knowledge of the industry, and allow you a step into that world. So, you know, for anybody new, it's about putting a team around you. So it's, you know, it's about, you know, finding someone who can manage you, who can book you, who can advise you and support you, who can do some PR for you, you know, and maybe those relationships will be very, very part-time and very low key, first of all, because you need to earn money, right, to pay for all of this support. But you know, that you can't do it on your own. And really, you know, that, I guess that for me is this sort of the interdependent bit, because you're so dependent on those skill sets all around you. And if you're trying to make it as a musician, you need to be focusing on your music and not all of these other things. So yeah, network and be interdependent.
All right, great, thanks. Here's one for Matt from Ty Tashira. What ideas do you have about distribution aggregation in Web 3.0?
I saw that question, and if you're in the audience still, I'd love to know, could you rephrase what distribution aggregation is? Because I'm not entirely sure what I would respond to there.
Okay.
In the short term, while they have time to type, I agree, and wanted to maybe speak to the first question too, that I think in many ways, the idea of you know, what a new kind of interdependent artist is maybe not the right question. I think if anything, you could write like a different historical overview of the history of independent music and come to the conclusion that everybody was an interdependent artist. And I think the reason why I emphasize that is that, particularly because I'm closer to the realm of developing new technologies, I think there's been a lot of emphasis on developing new technologies with this kind of like promotional understanding of what independent music was, of like the icons, the iconoclasts or whatever, who stood out from everybody else. And there's not been a lot of emphasis on the reality of the matter, which is that this, you know, independent music happened as a significant group undertaking. And that behind that person was a songwriter, and behind that person was XYZ, right? And so many of the skirmishes that we end up seeing with your Spotify's of the world, right, or your other companies that, in my mind, like have kind of independence poisoning, right? All of their messaging is about getting all these atomized individuals to, you know, be at home on their computer, pushing piano music to playlists all day or whatever. That's their ideal kind of submission. In a way, you can see that they've built a lot of this technology around this romantic fetishization of independence, right? Of this idea of saying, well, we're going to build everything so that individuals can go and pursue this. And I think after 10 years of it, we've seen, you know, it's not all bad, but we've seen kind of where that gets you. So if anything, my interest in like interdependence in this way, and maybe this also speaks to the distribution aggregation question, even though I'm not entirely sure what that is. That's probably on me and not on you. Is, you know, the great potential now is to rethink the stack that we work with, pun intended, Ed, to complement how music really works, as opposed to how music allegedly works, which is this idea of independent geniuses writing world-changing records at home in their studio and magically taking over the world. One of the great benefits of the internet in the past 10 years has also been that everybody now knows how things work. When you speak to 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, part of the reason they love Lil Nas X is because Lil Nas X is transparent about how things work. He's transparent about running little hustles and games, and they relate to him. They relate to the fact that now you can see who wrote the record. You don't have to pretend anymore. And so I'm very optimistic that in the next 10 to 15 years, we'll start to see tools that reflect how music actually works, as opposed to kind of responding to 20th century kind of promotional narratives about how music works.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of answered Ty's. He elaborated on the question about getting content on multiple platforms. The traditional distribution aggregators are either extremely centralized or too independent. So I mean,
Got it.
you touched on that very
I would
much.
say on that front too, you might want to look at, there's an organization called Revelator that I'm actually having on the podcast soon. And if you're particularly interested in that question, you might want to check in with Bruno there, because that they're kind of working in that realm, and they're cool, smart people.
And just running through, there's some practical things. There's also here's an interesting one, and I think this is in your area very much, Ed. Talking about scenes of people supporting each other and wanting to make a career of this stuff. This is from Niall Morris. Suggests a membership club. Can the panel think of ways that the type of pay a membership or pay off labor model that has been successful for autonomous DIY venues will scale up for bigger artists and labels, etc.?
That's interesting. I've lost the question. Is it still? Oh, it's there. Okay. Yeah, I mean, payment models are really, I mean, Delic is thinking about payment models, right? So I mean, at the moment, I think it's a good idea, first of all. I mean, I do think you can, like, definitely, I mean, the combination of cash, sort of regular cash, I'm actually not too sure about payoff labor. Does anyone know what that means? Or Niall, can you chat somewhere and tell us what the payoff labor piece is? Because it just got me going down a road that might be right, but it might just be completely wrong. So I'm not sure what payoff labor means. Is it as in you're paying a membership, or you pay in kind by doing stuff? Sounds like it might well be. Because I'll just assume that, because that's exactly what I see with something like Delic, where people are working with each other. There's a real missed opportunity, basically, by the fact that people are financializing everything. Well, not everything, but on digital, people are seeing things in terms of transactions of money. If you were able to, especially when you don't have much money, transact your labor with someone else who's transacting labor with you, for example, on a collaborative music creation platform like Delic, what you could see happening is you'd be able to swap your labor with the people that you work with in your band, for example, but potentially quantify that in a certain valuable way. And then when someone's doing way extra, like someone's going around town putting posters up for your gig, maybe they get paid by your project, or, because it's a boring job. But for the creative work, there's a sort of internal swapping going on that still has value. And if you could translate that value to make that value worth something that was then transactable for other goods, like digital music, say, you could actually get quite an interesting internal economy, as opposed to just getting to the point where people are like, can't afford it. What would be great is if people could, through their labor, earn transactable currency without having to put the currency in themselves. That's a very interesting concept. And that sounds like what Niall was talking about, maybe. But in terms of bigger artists, I think that would probably work quite well for them, maybe. Don't know, any artist, small artists, big artists, a way to sort of equalize in kind and in cash, and remove the relative importance of it must be money all the time. That's not a bad idea.
All right, great, thanks. We are coming to the end of the session. Really great, great discussion here. That's an extremely important topic right now. I would like to present a closing question to each of the panelists, same question. Can you provide an example of successful interdependence in the real world today? Hand over to Matt first.
Damn. Yeah. Well, I think maybe for novelty's sake, it's like as I said, in my characterization, independent music was an incredible success story, and it was because it was an interdependent structure. It just hasn't been characterized as such. It more close to stuff I'm working on at the moment, specifically to do with Web3. You know, most people don't know, but you know, the other week, for example, one of the large crypto art platform, Super Rare, which has been going for a number of years, free service to interact with and use, you know, decided to publish a bunch of shares and gave 15% to everybody who's used the service. It was over $150 million worth of money was given to every user, every artist, every collector, every participant who had an account up until a certain point. That's in real terms, outside of like beautiful interdependent things that happen in a kind of non-hard economic context. In real terms, that's what Web3 represents, and it happens very, very frequently. People who use platforms, people who contribute their art or their attention to platforms, ultimately ought to own a share in the upside of those platforms. And that, to me, in very real terms, which I think there's plenty of examples of interdependence in the world, but that's very new. That is very, very, very new. And so, yeah, so I think that for those who might be interested in that particular topic, it's worthwhile checking out and taking Web3 very, very seriously, because a lot of these kind of interdependent gestures are occurring. Yeah, and I think over time, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, it's those kind of new proposals of people expecting equity in the things that they contribute to. It's those kind of new proposals that will shepherd us into something different than what we have now.
Great. And Vic, your view?
Well, I think the example I'm most closest to is probably Delic, and the founding members. You know, I really I love the ethical ethos of Delic. That's why I'm involved. You know, I've worked with songwriters and composers for many years, and I know that they are often the bottom of the you know, the last to get paid, and they get paid the least. So you know, being involved with a platform which has the potential to really reward those creators by getting involved right now is something that you know, I think is really great. And Ed, I'm sure you can talk about it a lot more.
And final word to Ed. You're on mute again.
Just waxing lyrical there into the silence. Thanks, Vic. Yeah, so Delic's founding membership program is you do own a small piece of equity in return for giving your time in interviews and filling out surveys, and in return you get a very good value lifetime offer to the site as well. So like £1 a month membership of what is quite a data intensive application. So I obviously recommend everyone to check out Delic, but check out the founder membership program, which I'll share a link for. One thing I'd say also, just on the interdependence on the Delic side, is we are also moving into payments internally. So you can pay people who are mixing engineers, who are kind of acquaintances or people who are just on the cusp of between the creative relationship and the sort of, oh, I know someone else who's in another creative collective who's really great at engineering audio. The ability to pay each other in projects is going to be possible quite soon, so that there's a sort of economic interdependence at the granular level, which is often difficult. So many reasons for it, but mundane reasons, like it's really boring getting hold of 7 people's bank details if you're the project manager, and you become the bad guy just because you have to manage the payments. All of those things we see to be things of the past very soon using Delic. But my real world example has got to go to the Pianodrome, Edinburgh's www.pianodrome.org, which is something that Decagram worked with in terms of supplying beer for their bar in the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. But basically they are now an Internet of Things installation where they have real old pianos, upcycled old pianos in an amphitheater, which is acoustically amazing. People sit on the old pianos, and experimental alternative music is supported. It's funded through Creative Scotland, funded through bar sales and you know, savvy deals with people like us, Decagram, but also other breweries and spaces. And they've done a lot of work in terms of lobbying for the benefits of music and the benefits of recycling, and thinking about the different things that music tells you to do. A musical relationship or a musical passion community dictates certain ethical choices that you can then use to get organizations to support you, because they also want to support those things, like supporting obviously sustainability and fighting climate change, etc. So I would just say pianodrome.org, and they're just very kind of human live music context. And so I'll just send the link here. It's the best example, closest to home.
Great. Well, I think that sums it up. Thanks so much to our panelists, Vick Bain, Matt Dryhurst, and Ed Stack. Thanks also so much to the ISM for pulling all of this together and working with Delic. Want to mention next Thursday, September 23rd at 6 p.m. UK time, we'll have the ISM and Delic session number 4, how to make money from your music. We'll answer all the questions. Basically, looking beyond streaming and live gigs, we explore how musicians and music creators can make money from their music. Independent artists increasingly have portfolio careers. They need to manage multiple revenue streams to build career momentum. For independent artists, streaming is their primary source of income at 28%. Live revenue is second at 18%, which means they are less exposed to lockdown's impact than established label artists. But the key for today's artists is to make revenue from multiple professions, such as publishing, session work, sponsorship, and merchandise. Artists should think of themselves as small entrepreneurial businesses, and they need 4 or 5 income streams to get off the ground. So joining our moderator, BBC Radio Scotland DJ Vic Galloway, who will return for that, is the coordinator for Europe and the UK at CD Baby, Sandra Croft, the independent business affairs and rights management advisor at ISM, Mike Burgess, UK creator partnership at Patreon, G. Linford Grayson, and me, the CEO of Delic, John Maxwell Hobbs. Once again, thank you to our panelists, thank you to the ISM, and thank you to everyone who joined us for this session this evening. And have a great evening.
Thanks, John.
Thanks all. Nice to meet you.
Bye, Matt. Bye,
Thank
Vic.
you.
Ciao. Have a
Bye,
good day.
everyone.